I'm Jennie Clarke, I'm Head of Content at Global Relay, and I'm joined by superstar panel today. As Rob or Alex mentioned, it's what we've been kind of pegged as the main event, so no pressure. Just for a bit of context, we are today going to be looking at the regulatory compliance surveillance trends from the last year and the year ahead, based partially in kind of expert knowledge and partially on data from our latest data insight report. Little bit of a plug there. There will be a QR code to download it at the end. Essentially what that report is we collected or looked at a cross-section of 12,000 of our customers' data to see what communication channels they're capturing and preserving, with a view really to understand what's a priority, where there's emerging risk, whether it aligns with regulatory expectation and regulatory messaging. So today we're going to have a little look at that, and then looking at regulatory trends from the last year, put it all together, and a bit of analysis for the last year and the year ahead. So with that, I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves, because I think you probably can do a far better job at it than I'm going to be able to give justice to. Anna, I'll start with you because you are closest.
I am with Abrdn Asset Manager. I've been there for a year as their market conduct manager. Prior to that, I was with the regulator for 13 years, heading up their market abuse investigations team, and then a previous life, various investment banks.
Wonderful. Ugne?
I'm Ugne Willard. I am currently the Global Head of Communication Surveillance at Barclays, but I am probably one of not many people who really had career in surveillance. So I started as a surveillance analyst in HSBC in 2011, where I spent almost 9 years. Then I went on to Wells Fargo, and now I am at Barclays.
Amazing. Hannah.
Hi, I'm Hannah Bowery. I'm Senior Manager at PwC in the Market Abuse and Surveillance team. I've been there coming up 18 months, specialist focus in comm surveillance. Prior to that, spent most of my career in implementing and running comm surveillance programs, both voice and e-comms, at UBS for 10 years, and after that at Wells Fargo with Ugne for a couple of years.
Oh, I actually didn't realise you'd worked together. Interesting. So I'm going to kick off with the FCA. Anna, with you in mind. Last year we had Jamie Bell in the room with us. Today I'm not sure if we've got any FCA people in the room, but just put your fingers in your ears. We're basically, I think it's fair to say the FCA have had a bit of a tricky year, if not couple of years. I think it maybe all started around the time that the National Audit Office did their review into the FCA and came out with some kind of scathing commentary of the regulator. Last year, we obviously had the name and shame consultation, which I think a lot of people will be familiar with, if not really just for the amount of kind of politics that came out of it. We've then also seen, I think towards the end of last year, there was a parliamentary committee that said a variety of unpleasant things about the FCA. I've written a few of them down, but there was incompetent, dishonest, unaccountable, just to name a few. And then obviously start 2025, maybe it's going to be a fresh year for them, but actually there was then some lack of management around freedom of information requests. The list goes on, it's a joy. Anna, I'm going to come to you first. As an FCA veteran, what do you think is going on here? And is it kind of, some people have suggested it is kind of a weak management. Do you think that's the case, or is it just easy to throw stones?
So, as an ex-regulator, you're never expecting good headlines, really.
Yeah.
You never see anything praising the regulator, and rightly so. They're not doing that for praise. So I'm not surprised by some of the comments that were made over the past. I think you were being a bit generous there. For the 13 years I was there was, untold reports of kind of dishonesty and incompetence. So look, I'm not saying that it doesn't have its problems. My experience wasn't dishonesty, which is from an ex-employee. It's quite a disappointing thing to hear. But I think that particular report, and I know that they've also come back with a secondary ask because it's not been answered in the way that they would like. it's a funny one. I think somebody described it as asking like 10,000 Spurs fans what you think of Arsenal. So when you've got something like that, it's, you know, it is, you know, there is substance to some of it, but it's not anything new. Everybody knows about LCNF, everybody knows about Connaught. They've addressed them in various different forms. I'm not saying that, you know, that it's perfect now, but for me, it goes as part of the territory as being a regulator. There are things they could have done a lot better, and hopefully they are learning lessons from there, but it's part of the course, unfortunately.
Do you think the new kind of competitive growth angle and their new objective has kind of sent them scrambling a bit, or do you think this is just systemic and was bound to happen?
I think the growth thing has potentially put them on the back foot a little bit, and I think that's going to be one to watch. Obviously, for growth to happen, you know, things have got to be dialed down a little bit, and what that means for kind of the compliance and surveillance part, I don't quite know, but something's got to give there. So they are trying to please everybody. They've got such a massive remit at the FCA, and I think that's one of the things that works against them, is that they need to be everything to everybody all the time. As I say, the people that I worked with and the area I worked in spent a lot of time trying to do the right thing. You don't see the headlines on that, so it is just the negative that you see.
Are you finding that that's making your job, and Ugne, maybe you as well, are you finding it's making your job more difficult? Do you kind of feel the direct impact of that lack of management, or is it just you're just kind of business as usual?
I think it's BAU. I don't feel there's a direct impact in there. I think the FCA could be a little bit more direct, and I think they are being a little bit more direct. There's a lot more transparency now. You referred back to Jamie Bell's appearance here. Those types of things are, I think, quite helpful for the industry. The FCA has historically always been quite silent on matters. You might get the occasional market watch that comes out that might give you a bit of a direction, but there's nothing really like listening to somebody who works at the regulator that can, you know, give you the actual kind of crux of what they're trying to say, rather than just, you know, a load of garbage on legislation and, you know, leaving people trying to figure out what's going on. So,
yeah. Okay. Ugne, anything to add, or covered it?
I agree, covered.
Yeah, cool. You're right. I think transparency has been something they've massively focused on. And actually, to their credit, I think we are seeing a lot more direct messaging from them around expectations and bringing the industry together. One of those areas is AI, and I actually think, from my perspective, you're hearing a lot more, and the AI lab initiative that they have does seem to be trying to bring both kind of tech vendors, regulators, and firms together to work out a solution. So obviously we've got the AI lab, blah, blah, blah. The last year, they released a survey around December, I think it was, and they said that 75% of firms that they had surveyed are using AI now within their processes and systems. Ugne, I'm going to come to you on this. Does that surprise you?
Last December, that sounds like a high number in probably very limited areas, but it doesn't surprise me that it's probably quite significantly expanding as we speak. I think there is a pretty good relationship between the FCA regulators and the surveillance SMEs from the banks, from the firms. We do have forums, and we talk a lot, and we share our concerns about AI. What it was good to see in the last couple of years, the change of tone around explainability of how the black box is working. And I think the concerns that the firms brought to the FCA were by forcing us to explain, which we're not quants, we're not specialists in those areas, we are compliance officers, you may prevent the implementation of the future systems that may help us to better detect market misconduct or market abuse. And I think that landed with the regulators. I think it's still perhaps a little bit too cautious with the sandbox, and requires quite a lot of collaboration, but still admirable and very good progress. I do think FCA and us will have to think about faster ways and how to get comfortable with that to reap the benefits that come with it.
I think that was one of the things that they highlighted in their survey. Was they said 74% of people are using it. Only 35 or 34% of those people could explain or confidently explain how it works. And I remember there used to be the discussion with AI in particular of, well, we can't really use it in compliance or surveillance because we actually don't know how it works. And if we made a decision based on its rationale, we're not able to explain it to the regulator. Do you think that's shifting now? Because is it more important that you can say, we actually detected X number more true positives and we're getting better results? We can't fully explain to you how that happened. Is that a shift? I don't know. Ugne, Hannah, if you want to take that.
I would just say precisely. Yeah, I think it's not that it should happen, it has to happen. Yeah. Because the benefits, I think, those who have tried and played a little bit around with the Jennie AI, especially in the comm space, we already see how much value it could add on the top of our traditional methods that we're running today. So it would be very hard to prevent something that actually significantly enhances our detection capabilities.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think in terms of like the AI for surveillance, having that vendor documentation, vendor information up front when you're choosing to implement these tools, that's key. And the explainability, I mean, from our perspective, we're seeing a lot more clients coming to us to independently test and assess how these models are working. Okay. We are being approached by model governance teams, not necessarily just compliance and surveillance teams, as how that kind of independent testing and demonstrating how it works is important across the board.
I think we're seeing model risk management and model risk generally becoming something that is so important, and it's a conversation we're hearing again and again. So I assume you have seen more of that. Kind of, how do you approach that testing? Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, we're working with compliance and surveillance teams to look at what they've got. How do we independently test that? We work with vendors, and we try and get that documentation and explainability up front. Where that is lacking, that's where our kind of independent testing comes into place, and we're looking to use data sets, known data sets, unknown data sets, seeding that through models, letting the AI models sort of churn through that data, see what's coming out the other side, calculating recall rates, demonstrating that if a vendor is offering a model that looks for a particular risk, that is actually able to do so. So that's typically what we're seeing, what we're being asked to do. Outside of that seeding process, we're looking at unalerted communications reviews, we're looking at below the line testing, assessing like thresholds of how we're finding the right level for alerts to come up. Right. Do you do kind of lexicon versus LLM? Yes, stuff? Absolutely. We're looking at that comparison, particularly where a firm is looking to replace what they've got at the moment. Yes, we have done that for clients, and we see sort of stark numbers in terms of the ability to look at and identify what they're trying to actually identify. Okay. I guess then that comes back to the whole explainability thing. If you're seeing stark results in terms of what it can achieve, how far do you need to explain that? Yeah, and having those results on paper, showing that makes it sort of clear that this is the way forward. So having that explainability to that extent sort of helps demonstrate that lexicons, or what you're replacing your lexicon with, is much more effective. Yeah. Just coming back to that initial figure of 75%, does that surprise you?
It is quite high. It does make me wonder whether or not people are being completely truthful, or something like me, where you just say, "Oh yeah, I know what AI is." I don't. So, but yeah, it does surprise me.
I do think it's still very early stages. I mean, there is so much movement with it, but actually, the number of people who are taking the leap to actually explore it.
I think the AI lab that you spoke about is a for me, a good initiative from the regulator. It's a break from the norm, where they are engaging with the industry to try and build a regulatory framework around something that, is kind of unknown, and obviously you've got the fintechs that are kind of dancing around the edges and ready to build the solution. So it works for all parties. So it's something that surprised me, but it looks like it's going great guns from what I can see.
Yep.
I think we're noticing, and we already spoken late last year, that communication surveillance specifically is sort of approaching a huge paradigm shift in how we're going to enhance our approach in surveilling in the future, because we haven't seen any significant changes since the NLP models have been introduced, and that was probably more than a decade ago now. And all the Gen AI specifically, the offering they have, it's lending itself to be applied to communication surveillance. So pretty sure probably most of this audience are thinking about it or trying to test something internally or with the vendors, but it's inevitable, and I think there is a lot of excitement around that, because how it's going to change the risk detection, how it's going to change how we set up our teams, if the robot will decide whether it's level 1 closure, whether it's market abuse or not. So do we need people overseeing what the robot is doing? So it's all extremely exciting, because I think it will shape the operations, the team setup, the skill sets that we need. Model risk will hopefully will try to adapt as good as possible to not becoming a blocker for that, which is a negative word, but I'm not sure that model risk has answers today in how to deal with Gen AI adoption. Right now, it's all very much on a conservative side, and we are scared to go too far with it. So I think that's going to be a separate challenge that we're probably going to continue talking quite a bit as we make progress there. But as a whole, I think it's extremely exciting space in a very long time in surveillance.
Yeah. Just something that intrigues me as well with the model risk stuff is longevity, because you might verify it and validate it at the outset, but things are changing so quickly that how quickly does that then become out of date, or do you need to alter it? Is that something you're kind of experiencing?
And I think the sort of the dialogue where it's going is, will model risk be performed also by AI?
Yeah. Okay.
Because
checking itself.
Yeah, I think that's what we're seeing. Like, making sure you're aware of, like you say, changing market conditions, changing communication patterns. Like, how do you make sure what you implemented a year ago or today is still working as you thought it was in a year's time? So you do need that constant reassessment. But like you said, is that done by us, or is that done by a machine?
Yeah, and I guess it's not a new concept to compliance or surveillance that you're going to have to keep revisiting and making sure things are up to date. It's just a slightly different approach. Another thing that the FCA are quite hot on at the moment, and I think yesterday's speech, which Mark and Alex just covered, proves that, is non-financial misconduct. And when Jamie Bell was here last year, he said, oh, watch this space, because we're going to come and basically do a load of research into how firms are addressing non-financial misconduct. Lo and behold, I think the same day or the day after, surveys went out to find out how people are managing it. We've seen the speeches. There was obviously a Dear CEO letter, I think it was last week, it may have been the week before, to wholesale brokers, which had a strong conduct focus. Anna, I'll come to you on this first. Do you think that message is resonating, and how is it then translating into your approach?
So I don't think it's a new thing that kind of conduct and culture it goes hand in hand, really. From my time at the regulator, and I think Jamie Bell spoke about this during his time here, it was rare that you would see a market abuse case that didn't have elements of other types of misconduct, be it sexism, racism. There was always some other element to the cases that we looked at. In fact, I'd probably say about 95%. So it was very rare you'd get somebody that was, completely straight, hadn't ever breached a Jennie or forgot to do their compliance training. So for me, it's about gathering all the information that I can have access to, obviously HR data aside, and just building out those red flags and seeing whether or not actually have we known that this was a risk coming. So, I talk about things like PA dealing breaches. So, in its isolation, is it the worst thing in the world? Probably not, but at the same time, you have a policy for a reason. It's there to be adhered to. So therefore, what is somebody's viewpoint on compliance if they can't get their PA dealing right, or they don't do their attestations on time? Is it all there in front of you? And then you need to know whether or not you've got the tone from the top. So what do we do about those breaches? Is it something that you just sweep under the carpet? And I would advise against that, again, from my time at the regulator. If we were looking at anybody that was a regulated individual, we would inevitably find a HR file that was as long as your arm, with all these red flags in them. So for me, it's about using the data I have access to see whether or not it's something that I want to look more into, or target my surveillance into. It's not a new thing. Poor conduct does lead to poor culture, as Emily pointed out yesterday, and it does just encourage more and more behaviour to just bump along the bottom rather than actually pull your socks up. So I don't think it's a new thing. I think it's you're missing a trick there if you don't look at the data that you hold within your firm to help form what you think of kind of the culture within your firm.
There was some talk of it being integrated within kind of fitness and proper assessments and that sort of thing. Is that something any of you are considering, or?
It's not something we're considering at the moment. I think we're probably going to wait and see what the next steps are from the FCA and the next the guidance that is hopefully going to come out soon. But it's again, I think aside from that, I certainly want my team to be looking at all kinds of breaches and getting the more holistic view and the bigger picture than just a small portion of what we can see.
Yeah. How then are you seeing surveillance play a role in non-financial misconduct, Hannah or Ugne?
So I think from my experience, comms surveillance program is primarily put in place for market abuse, conduct, and by virtue of that, you often see conduct type issues as well, sexism, swearing, whatever, all kinds of things. I think now we're seeing the switch to how do we actively try and use that information. I think this month FMSB have published standards for front office supervision again, so sort of putting that down on paper, like how important is it to use that information, and sort of back to Anna's point earlier around using the data that you have. Quite often I've seen that you might have what would be called like a HR type escalation. It goes to HR and not from a surveillance program point of view, it's not really thought about again. But I think more needs to be done to use that MI, use it to drive the program, and figure out where you want to go proactively to look for this kind of behaviour.
So I think whilst this is helpful, and probably most of us try to gather one way or the other the information to show trends in different types of conduct, I think what the recent articles or speeches, specifically by the FCA, kind of targeting a slightly different angle. It's not so much, well, what does surveillance do or other control teams within the firms to identify it, is how do you change it, right? How do you inherently try to avoid that? And I think this is not old. This is not a new topic, as you say. This has been now for a very long time. But I think a lot of firms have try to implement that culture and conduct frameworks extremely ineffectively. It's very much, we're all in a high profit-making organizations, I guess. We're all in the finance industry, but it became so negative to recognize that the primary objective is to make profits. And so nobody's talking about the profits. People try to talk about bigger things, why we're here, and ultimately this sort of profit making becomes like a bad thing. And then you try to put on conduct and various things around controlling that it's not about the profit, it's about you behaving well, but actually it should be probably the honesty should be, we are here to make profits. Let's make sure that we do that in a compliant way. And I think it would be much easier to accept for front office that, okay, great, I'm here to do my job. And then, yes, I will try to do my best to comply with PA dealing and all the other aspects. So I think it does require shift in thinking in how to effectively implement this.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It isn't new, but it still feels like there's such a long way to go and so many things that could still be considered with it. I'm going to move on to a slightly different area now, social media. So part of our the survey that we ran and the report that we published last year found that 33% of the 12,000 firms that we looked at were capturing at least one form of social media. And I don't think this is necessarily new either. Over the last couple of years, social media has definitely reared its head as a kind of comms issue, there's potential for kind of market disruption in there, there's finfluencers and marketing, there's so many levels of it. But yeah, 33% were capturing a form of it, 16% increase year on year in the number of people capturing YouTube, and 16% of increase in the number of firms capturing also personal Instagram accounts, which I thought was quite interesting. LinkedIn remains quite a significant kind of capture method on our report. We've seen 24% of firms are capturing the individual profiles of individuals. Actually, this week, FINRA and the Canadian regulator CERO published reports, both of which highlighted the social media as comms risks. So it's coming from the regulator now as well, which is interesting. Hannah, actually, I might come to you on this first. Are you seeing social media as a risk? Is it something that's on your radar?
Honestly, when we're speaking with clients and when we've done our survey, social media is not right at the top of that list. It is being discussed, but not right at the top. I think whilst there's still gaps in more traditional communication methods for surveillance, that has remained priority. Obviously, we've seen like massive swing in mobile messaging capture over the last couple of years. There's still some gaps in there. The movement away from managing that through policy rather than actually capturing as part of surveillance. It may say that, if mobile messaging has been the thing for the last 2 years, who's to say social media won't be for the next couple of years? Is it going in that direction? But actively, I'm not seeing it in practice that, especially from a market conduct or market abuse perspective, that they are looking to capture Instagram.
Surprise. Ugne?
I think it's very straightforward. If it's allowed for business use, then it has to be recorded. If it's recorded, then it has to go through surveillance. The personal Instagram accounts, it's an odd one. Would be good to hear how people got around that in the context of all data privacy considerations. But there are various communications teams within organizations that do sort of cross checks on LinkedIn and how the employees are behaving themselves. What messages are trending on social media, but that's not surveillance by processing the data from social channels. So for me, it's as soon as Barclays will at some point make a decision, I don't know, to allow Instagram, then it will have to be recorded, and that's it.
Yeah, I like that. Clear.
Yes. So,
Anna, have you got any thoughts on it?
No, I think my experience with the regulator was very much that if you're going to allow it, you need to be able to do surveillance on it. At Abrdn, it's very much not not a thing. It's you use business channels to do the communication, which we've got obviously surveillance on. But no, nobody's using their Xbox to talk to their clients, thank God. So, well, not yet anyway.
No, I think there was just one instance of that. And I think
that didn't end well, did it?
No, it didn't.
We did just an interesting point, perhaps. We did have US regulators reaching out to us asking specifically about 4 websites. One of them was Yelp, and the other used by mainly US not employees, but in the US region, I believe Yellow Pages as well.
Oh.
And the sort of the angle, the way the approach was, are you aware that these websites do have chat functionality? And do you consider disabling it? So that was sort of prompting to consider to at least block, not expectation to surveil, but so that's another, I guess, how do we, in surveillance, how do we collaborate with those who make a decision which websites need to be blocked? Because I don't necessarily think that those teams, data privacy teams, typically think, oh, this website might have chat functionality, therefore I'm going to block it.
Yeah.
So I think more cross collaboration is required on that angle.
Sarah, I agree with that, and I think there needs to be more, regardless of what the communication channel is or website or app, that having those processes up front to identify within a firm what is being used, and so that you can proactively put surveillance or block it in place, rather than, oh no, this team have been using Yelp for the last 5 years and we didn't know about it. It seems still a little bit more reactive than proactive.
Yeah, I think that massive fine for JP Morgan that we saw last year probably has put people a little bit on edge about that as well, because data governance is huge. I'm going to actually skip the next question because I'm aware that we are running dangerously close to time, and I want to make sure people can ask questions if they'd like. So I'm going to skip to future state because I think we're still close enough to the beginning of the year to look ahead. What are you kind of focusing on at the moment, and what do you think that you'll be focusing on for the next year? We'll just go around.
So I think my main focus at the moment is we are looking quite closely at how AI can be implemented, not just from a dealing perspective, but from on the asset management side, a fair allocation. So the cherry picking fine that happened with AXA years and years ago is still kind of quite fresh in people's minds. So that fair allocation process. Can AI help? We've worked with some fintechs quite recently, so and they've got some great ideas. So I'd like that to kind of continue. Other than that, I think I'm just waiting to see what this growth is going to bring in terms of what we need to be focused on, or what risks it's going to raise. But yeah, I think that should keep me busy enough.
Yeah, I think you've got enough on your plate. Ugne?
By end of this year, or hopefully sooner, I hope to have the approvals in place to start adopting AI, Jennie AI, for communications surveillance.
Does that look realistic?
I don't know.
Okay. Hannah?
For us and for clients that we're working with, data governance is key at the moment. Establishing where your data is, how data completeness. Another topic that we're looking at quite closely is as part of like vendor evaluations and the smart AI tech that's out there that are using LLMs with 7 billion, 8 billion training examples. How are we differentiating between those offerings when we're making a decision to implement comm surveillance in that way?
It's quite interesting thinking about this time last year. We ran a similar panel and we kind of didn't touch on AI because it was like, oh, we don't really know enough about it. We're not really sure what we're going to do with it. And this time, 1 year on, which really isn't that far on, suddenly it's like, we want to implement it by the end of the year. We're looking into it. It just seems like there's been a huge and very sudden shift over the last year, which is exciting. It gives us new challenges. Okay, well, I think we are at time, and we've got a fantastic panel coming up. We are now going to go to a brief commercial break, about a minute, really just while we organise the chairs on the stage. But if you focus on Alex and ignore the chair movement, thank you all so much for joining us today. I know you're incredibly busy, and it was really valuable. So yeah, thank you.
Very much.